Welcome to Mindful Drawing. I'm Robert, and I'll be your guide on this meditative practice that enters into a space of mindfulness through the act of drawing. This week I thought we'd explore the rhythms that construct virtual worlds on the page by letting us enter into the illusion of a three-dimensional space through the interaction of a few crossing two-dimensional lines. Don't worry if you don't have any experience in drawing 3D projections or constructions. This is something similar to an axonometric view, if you are familiar with that. I'll start by establishing just a field of crossing parallel-ish lines. Use that to enter into a space of our breath and calm and relax into the body. And then we'll finish out the second half of the exercise by exploring those intersections by adding a third axis or dimension in the vertical and horizontal, and seeing what kind of spaces, planes, volumes, or surfaces might form there as we meander on a line through this rhythmic network of paths that we've constructed for ourselves. I'm going to begin the drawing with a pencil, something light, just to mark out the territory, and then move on to a little bit heavier pen or marker to work between it to pull value to the surface. But you can use anything you'd like. Pen, pencil, overlapping lines will all work. But feel free to use whatever you have at hand or anything you'd like to draw with to explore, or just making a series of lines and wrapping them into some shapes on a piece of paper. Go ahead and gather your supplies, establish your space, and let's draw together. We'll begin with the warm-up. In this case, looking at creating the framework or matrix on a piece of paper for exploring a bit of a three-dimensional illusion, perhaps, but construction of things that look three-dimensional to our eye. To help with that, we'll set up some guiding lines or rhythms and see where that takes us as an exploration. And we'll jump in there, give the hands just a little bit of a stretch and a tension to feel them out. Wiggle the fingers, curl them forward and back, back and forward. Rotate up and down, just to feel out any kinks there that might be in the joints. Make sure they're ready and warmed up to move the pencil around. And then on a scratch piece of paper and page in the sketchbook, what we're going to look at doing is creating kind of a diagonal grid system. The angle that it meets, looking more for consistency, but around 90 degrees. So I'm just going to begin by picking one of the diagonals and drawing some light lines from edge to edge across the paper. And generally parallel, but anything that drifts a little off one way or another won't harm anything. And part of the exercise will be exploring this rhythm along the page. Is it even? Or do we find ebbs and flows, expansions and contractions? The other part of the exercise will do with how we form these lines, forward or backwards, toward or away, fast or slow. And then after creating one direction to this, creating kind of an opposing, generally perpendicular, but more consistency of the parallel nature. And in this warm-up of moving the hand out, moving the hand back, getting a feel for the two different angles. Maybe we'll work a little bit back and forth between them once we have the setup there, so that we feel comfortable moving the hand in the two directions. Or if you notice any resistance, tightness in there, working through it here in the warm-up time. It may help to work in one consistent direction, so you can suspend the arm well and find a nice neutral but engaged hold, not pressing on the paper, but not forced tight into space. It may help to hold it a little more like a brush out at the end. We'll probably call this wobblier lines, but a little softer and lighter hold to deal with the two opposing directionalities. If you can turn your paper, in a sketchbook or something, you can adjust to feel what works well for you. But if you can't, finding it by drawing these few lines. And those angles could be in any direction on the page. I just think I'll keep the kind of general X pattern going. As we move to the larger, longer exercise, taking a few moments from that warm-up to be present in the space. You may put down the pen or pencil and just let the hands open. Let them come to rest on your lap, on the table, on the sketchbook in front of you, in kind of a neutral position, wherever they want to curl or expand to. Then take a breath in and roll the shoulders up towards the ears, and on the breath out, roll back down, away. Repeat a few times of breathing in on the way up and out to relax away any tension, really bringing the mind into the rolling of the shoulders, moving forward, up, back, and down with the breath cycle. And on the next cycle for yourself, reversing direction, breathing in on the back, up, out on the forward, and down. Rolling through a few at your pace. Maybe noticing any pops or kinks, working through or around them. You need to extend beyond a comfortable range. Just getting that shoulder girdle and upper back warmed up to support us in the exercise. And as we move back to our page, taking one centering deep breath, filling out the space of the lungs, up, down, in, out, forward, and back. Sipping it a little more at the hold, and just letting it release completely, empty out the space of the lungs. Ready to engage with the page. Now, if that cycle of breath in our foreground of attention, choosing the starting direction, right to left, left to right, slanted, forward or back. Take a breath in and draw that first mark across the space of the paper. Letting the breath move out and in at an even pace as we draw. That first line establishing the angle of interaction that we will engage with in this direction. And wherever that may be centered or edge, working out from there, beginning to explore a rhythm with each breath in, establishing a starting location in which each breath out and its subsequent cycles, working across the page, generally parallel to the first line. Starting with that mindful attention to our breath, we may be even. So we draw out, breathe in for the next cycle, choose a generally equal spacing, breathe out again for a cycle there across the page. No need to worry if the lines wobble or vary slightly in their parallelness. Some of that is position, practice, tools. If we want to focus our attention there, that may draw the mind in with each breath. Carefully guiding, exercising that hand-eye coordination. If we want to just let the movement happen, focus more on the extension of the arm, the leverage of the hand, wrist, finger connection, and let it track loosely with the eye as best as it can each time. The breath being a guide in and out, the page being a guide as it narrows towards the edges. Do we slow down for that breath to fully exhale as it gets narrower, or if we reach the edge, beginning again in the other direction? The difference of our attention to the long or the short. The smooth, flowing gesture with a controlled, careful line. These repetitions of breath, filling up some space, establishing a rhythm to the paper, bringing a field of potential interaction out onto that open page. If you've begun to fill up the space in this direction, you could switch to the alternating, generally perpendicular intersection, or look for opportunities to continue to draw between, to change the rhythm, perhaps a light doubling up of certain lines that catch the eye. Still guided by the breath in as we find the location to start the line, and a breath out as we draw on the page. The mindful portion of the practice, keeping that connection without getting too far ahead of our action, too far disconnected from the presence of drawing that line, centered and anchored by the rhythm of the breath. As my page begins to fill, I'm going to move to the alternate direction. After a few reinforcing insertions into the rhythm, just at a moments where my eye is drawn to break up some of the irregularity and see where that might go. If you're changing direction at this time, good chance to sit with some stillness for a moment, reconfigure if need be for drawing in a new direction, re-engage that arm, hand, move generally perpendicular across that field. Once established, continuing the cycle of the breath, the spacing can start to vary, perhaps looser than the original, more random or tighter, something we bring our attention to now that the fields exist. Beginning to play with those lines a little bit in the space we've made, but maintaining a general parallel series of lines, creating a bit of a grid there loosely on the paper. I'm working in the beginning with pencil, which seems to be losing its lead. But we'll come back and do a reading through with a heavier line, a heavier pencil or an ink pen if you have it. We're just drawing with more pressure to read through this grid. So if your page is beginning to fill, for just a few more breaths to transition from this part of the exercise, find a few more lines in either direction to connect across the page to insert into that rhythm little anomalies, little changes, local disturbances of the weave of this fabric growing out here onto the paper. Really paying attention to that in breath and that out breath to fully release into the action of the paper. Fully release any tension into that motion of the hand. Fully release any holding on to the precision of this grid for now. Letting it become that organic space of our interaction between presence, movement, and our body's cycle of breathing in and breathing out. Maybe a couple moments of still breathing before we enter into the territory to explore what we can construct out of it. Preparing for the next phase. If you want to switch again to a heavier instrument, a pen, or just keep using the same tool, all will work. And what we'll begin doing here is finding an intersection, traveling along a line, and anywhere along that line at an intersection or just a point, turning, moving directly up or directly down, perhaps until we hit another line, and turning to follow it again, jumping through the network, up and down, parallel and perpendicular, and seeing where that pen may travel for a while, loosely forming a three-dimensional collection of planes, bent and twisted depending on how it works within the grid. While just changing one axis to that vertical or horizontal, and returning now and then to the rhythm we've created. Wrapping around parts of the grid, pulling them out from the background. Having a little journey in the construction of space. This first interaction, just a learning of the motion, the tracking of intersections and bridging across fields. An opening up of new possible ways of forming line, edge, and space. And once that begins to feel comfortable, you begin to see through the patterns of movement where the pen or pencil can go, and to see potential opportunity to move up or down, left or right, a little world that's made some moves, expressing potential 3D connections, others crossing over, bridging back to the two-dimensional diagonal grid that we have. Just observing what you can do with that movement within the space. Not every line has to actually touch the construction. The grid can be just a guide for maintaining roughly parallel and perpendicular connections which contribute to our observation of something with volume and connection through 3 axes across space. So we can move anywhere freely in the grid of the world. Little vignettes of traveling. If we work parallel or in repetition to previous actions, we may find greater suggestions of those forms, extensions out into new planes of space. If you're following the grid, you may find opportunities for connection between these meanderings, motion, extended, we can begin to use what our eye is seeing and tracking, use the construction that we've set up, the platform we've set up to extend our perception, our imagination into this space, maintaining that relationship, crossing perpendicular lines with the occasional deviation to vertical to start to form around space, form around potential figures, wrap just enough to see a plane. And in the time of drawing with ourselves in quiet, perhaps filling in a little bit of the space between, finding shape that connect, reinforcing them with an offset or a movement around that vertical transition from the X configuration. So whatever you're finding there, take these next 5 minutes or so to see if you can reinforce planes of interaction or space, maybe lightly bounded, or something may begin to cross from one to another, or reveal potential figure of geometry, continuing to play in that illusion of the depth and three-dimensionality by following the parallel edges into and out of the page. And see what small world might develop there, their consistencies, strange overlaps. Just a game of walking through. We come towards the closing of the exercise, if you have some experience with 3D construction and drawing, perhaps it's a bit familiar. The tools developed as a way of representing our perception of depth in space through a X, Y, and Z, or some Cartesian system. Originally developed for representation of that idea to construct space virtually on the page. A way of showing, connecting things of more physical territory from the 2D surface or canvas of drawing, with also this potential for misalignment, misuse, breaking or fracturing of that construction, generative with new ideas, new possible interactions, a chance to explore a world that may not all work out at first, but it can be resolved through just connecting a few lines in the correct order if we were on to explore it back to our perception of space. Letting the technique be generative and descriptive, an important part of any drawing tool. But as we close out, return into our space, perhaps that doodle can be useful in describing something seen or imagined, or finding new flows and rhythms. Welcome back from the meditation, the meandering through that space you created there, letting your imagination take root and explore the construction of the horizontal and vertical, the parallel and perpendicular. Hopefully something came out of it that you can begin to see as three-dimensional, but if not, it's just a grid of lines and patterns. That may be also interesting, and enjoy what you've created there for yourself. The axonometric three-dimensional construction, a technique to virtualize our perception of 3D space, a chance to bring things into a more depth-based reality just by connecting those axes in 3 directions. It's going to allow you to represent a lot of things, to sketch out an idea, to create a space, to explore the intersections of materials, or to detail a complex object. If you're interested in these techniques, there's some other videos on the channel created for our first-year representation course at Pratt that look at plan oblique construction, successive auxiliary, and isometric construction that explore the tools that allow us to construct these environments with precision, with repeatability, with a structure that lines up with dimension, the thicknesses of material that can lead to the construction of real things that is repeatable and unfoldable between the 2D and 3D realms. I hope you've enjoyed the exercise. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment below of what you discovered during your own mindful practice through drawing. Share with your friends, and hopefully come back to catch new episodes each week, usually on Wednesdays here on YouTube, or find us live via Twitch at Rooks is Fun on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., or through the Mindful Pratt drop-ins each week. I'm Robert, signing off. Draw well. Thank you for joining.